Okay.
Okay, we're rolling. Scott, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Coming out in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
Well, you know as well as I do that one of Michael Rood's most famous sayings is, when the brimstone hits the fan. And sooner or later, it's going to hit the fan. And these days, it seems like it's getting closer and closer. So you go online, you start figuring out how to prep. What kind of things do I need to have in my closet? What do I need for family protection? What do I need to be looking out for? That type of thing. And you may have come across a guy named Bear Independent. Well, guess what? He joins us today on Shabbat Night Live. Welcome.
Shalom, brother.
Better known as TJ Morris.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Bear from the internet, yep.
Bear from the internet. Now, as we were talking here before the cameras came on, you told me that you have no fewer than 5 businesses. And I've looked at some of your stuff on how to be a CEO, and we're going to get more into that. That's really interesting. I'm actually learning a lot from that. Awesome. And 2 ministries.
Yep.
So tell us about all you have going on, and then we'll get into how we got here. So,
well, yeah, we've got 5 businesses and 2 ministries. About 7 years ago, I started a little YouTube channel, and it actually was and is based around preparedness, because I saw somebody else on the internet giving terrible advice, and I was complaining to my wife that that person was giving bad advice and they're going to get people killed. And so she said, "We'll make a video about it." I said, "Well, I don't want to." She said, "Well, then shut up." Okay. Well, a little back and forth, I made a video, and we've now done more than 6,000 videos and live streams in about 7 years on the Bear Independent channel. And we do that for YouTube and for Patreon and on Rumble. So that's one of them. Whether you consider it a business or not, the IRS does. So we treat it as a business. We have media teams and we have administrative teams, and we produce and batch content. It is a business legitimately. I'm also the founder and CEO of Refuge Medical. Yahuwah is our refuge and our strength. It's not a coincidence that we named it that. And Refuge Medical produces the best first aid kits on planet Earth.
now you guys, I just learned about this recently, where you don't, send a model off to China and have them make it. You guys make this in the USA.
Correct. We have 4 sew shops here in the United States of America. We have a plastic blow mold injection shop here in Texas. And we've got a machine shop here in Texas. And so we use all of those different pieces and parts to actually produce here the first aid kits. And we use components from all the best companies, North American Rescue, TACMed Solutions, Medline, et cetera. But all the cases and the pouches and all of that are made here by Americans and unconditionally guaranteed forever. And that I needed a first aid kit that didn't suck for me 4 years ago. And so I paid a buddy $1,000 to prototype one, and he sent me 6 back. All the same, but I had 6 of these things. Well, what am I going to do with 6 of them? So I sent one to one buddy, one to another buddy. One was an Air Force PJ, the other was U.S. Army Special Forces. And they both came back. We're like, "These things are awesome. We want 50. We want 100. Hold on. I just wanted your input."
It's a prototype, just hang on.
So I called my buddy and I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna need like another 150 of those things." And he's like, "Okay, cool." So we produced that. And then, "Hey, we need 400, we need this, we need that." And what's super cool is with our Patreon community, I asked the patrons, "What type of swag would you like to see? T-shirts, hats, stickers, patches." And I just put first aid kit in there. Business. Within 24 hours, I had 336 people that had told me, by an overwhelming majority, they were willing to pay for a first aid kit. Cool. So, hey, here's the first Bear first aid kit. And it's grown from an hour a month in my barn, me part-time, to now we've got 23 families that are supported by Refuge Medical. We're on 4 continents with all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces electively, and our kits have saved 92 lives that we know of to date.
Wow, that's
in 4
awesome.
years.
Now we're going to do a whole episode on that. So let's save the juicy stuff. Yeah.
I apologize.
No, that's good. That's good.
Then we've also got Refuge Training. Refuge Training, we teach you the fine art of how to not die. And so that's a spin that came out of Refuge Medical. I want people to have the kit. I also want them to know how to use the kit. So we do civilian tactical medicine using scenario-based training. We do force on force. We have crisis actors and all that. Then I've got a consultancy called Prosper Ready. do business consulting, business development, and then also on the preparedness side. And then I've got a fifth business, which is a cutout from one of the ministries. The first ministry is Grindstone Ministries. We deploy all over the United States after hurricanes and tornadoes. We do no-cost disaster relief.
How do you manage that?
So we're supported by people like those that support you. It's all privately funded. It's a volunteer network of people. We've got 2 people on staff year-round that maintain the equipment and administer the organization. And everything else is 100% voluntary.
Wow.
And we've been blessed. We mobilize up to 200 people on a site. Give me 48 hours, I'm gonna have 200 people there. It's amazing. And so we've deployed with Grindstone 41 times in the last 4 years.
Now you're based out of Oklahoma.
Yes,
right?
sir.
So that's
Correct.
mainly, are you seeing a lot of tornado stuff happen out there locally and then?
Tornadoes and hurricanes. Get a lot of hurricanes on the Gulf Coast in Florida and then tornadoes in the center of the country, but also now more so because of the way the Gulf Stream is shifting down into the southeast, tornadoes as well. And also further north, I mean, Mayfield, Kentucky was a very serious tornado. So we've deployed to all of those, and we'll go in for anywhere at a minimum 3 days up to 30 days in a disaster relief deployment. And then we have Caleb House, Caleb with a K, Caleb House. And Caleb House is a ministry where we rescue and rehabilitate juvenile human trafficking survivors. Dude, never thought I'd be into that. Didn't know the Father was going to call me to that, but he did. And we are 100% privately funded with that as well. We don't take a dime from the government. We don't take a dime from foundations or organizations because I don't want anybody else telling us how we have to do this. And we are the only, that I'm aware of, Torah-based ministry doing anything like this. And it has been an absolute blessing to be able to go rescue and restore dozens of kiddos. So, forsake not the widow and the orphan. Check.
Amen.
Doing the best that we can.
Wow.
That's me in a nutshell.
You know, that I noticed here, that's the only thing you mentioned that really chokes you up.
Yeah.
Because you have kids too, like I do, right?
Yep.
And that's, to even imagine your kids in that position, like, wow, you know, that's, you don't even want to go there.
Imagine the worst thing that you know of that could possibly happen to a child, then increase the intensity 100-fold, and then multiply that across hundreds of thousands of children per year. It's insane. You know, we fight not against flesh and blood, but against nations and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. And that was a concept to me before I started doing this. Now I know it's a reality. And it's very heavy work, but it's incredibly rewarding work as well. So.
Wow. Now, a lot of this sounds like, wow, you must have had a lot of military training. How long were you in the military? And when we were planning
0 days.
Yeah, and you told me that this is crazy that, you know, you know all of these things, and obviously this comes from when you were younger. You know, you've learned a lot of things along the way, but military was not in the cards for you. So why is that? Let's start from when you were a kid. I mean, what happened here?
So started my first business when I was 17 years old, cutting timber because my mom worked for the phone company and they went on strike for 2 years. My dad was out of the picture. And so I had already been working full-time since the age of 15 just to help pay the bills. And a long story short, I was cutting timber and I broke my sternum. And so the United States Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Davalos basically said, in their words, this is pre-9/11, said, you're more of a liability than an asset. And it crushed me. And I was like, all right, cool. Well, I'm just going to keep cutting timber then. And then 9/11 happened. And then the phone kept ringing and kept ringing. And it's the United States Marine Corps. Son, we'd love to have you. Well, you didn't want me 8 months ago, right? And I can be a little vindictive. So anyway, well, they stopped calling and some other people started calling. And long story short, I ended up as a subject matter expert for the DOD on the national grid. My dad had a long backstory doing TSSCI work for the DOD, wiring, you know, Offutt Air Force Base, Strategic Air Command, White Sands Missile Range by himself, power and telecom. And so we had some really interesting bring your kids to work days when I was growing up. And in any event, I've been working on power distribution and power transmission. I've got pictures of me 4 years old sitting on a dozer plowing in cable. So I've spent a considerable portion of my life in that purview. And then because of that, after 9/11, we were outwardly very focused on what was happening in the Middle East and what deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan were going to look like and so forth and so on. We were much more so, the big we, the United States, was much more quietly concerned about attacks on infrastructure, critical infrastructure here domestically.
Like we are now, for example.
Like we are right now, right? So, you know, water sources, electrical generation, natural gas, roadways, hospitals, the medical, all that. I happen to know those things, happen to have some family connections. The phone started ringing, and then that put me in touch with DOD personnel, Customs and Border Patrol, state agencies, the Department of Energy, DIA, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've been really blessed to rub up against people like that, but I've never been a person like that, if that makes sense. But I speak their language, so yeah.
Wow. So you started all this very young, had some influence from Dad.
Yep.
So then you start working in this avenue, and you know, let's get into again how that happened a little bit later. But
Yep.
you mentioned infrastructure, and
Yep.
I think if my ears perked up, some other people's ears perked up. Wait a minute. So how vulnerable is, without getting into things that I know you can't talk about, how vulnerable is our grid, for example?
That fast. I would tell your viewers to not plan for if it goes away, plan for when it goes away. And it doesn't need to be a high altitude EMP. It doesn't need to be a coordinated attack by dozens of sleeper cells from Hamas or the Chinese or whatever. It doesn't need to be any of that. The number one enemy that the grid has is atrophy. It's old. It's expensive to maintain. And then, of course, you have certain political factions in this country that are taking offline reliable energy production and introducing unreliable energy production. I've done a lot of wind and a little bit of solar. Those will always be secondary generation because wind turbines only work when the wind's blowing. Solar only works when the sun's out. And we don't currently have the capacitor technology to store the energy as it's produced and then trickle it back out into the grid as it's needed. We don't have that.
So not even with people like Tesla, you know, like Elon Musk and people like that.
If you mined all the cobalt and lithium on planet Earth, and if you turned it into batteries, and you put all of those batteries in the United States, and you used all of those batteries to store electricity for the grid, all of it, we have 4 hours of battery backup for the United States.
Okay, that puts in perspective.
It is not possible using current technology. We currently, for your viewers, the battery backups that exist on the national grid infrastructure equate to 4 minutes of runtime. 4. The grid is fragile. I hate to say that, but it's very fragile, and everything that we depend upon in this modern society comes from the grid. When the electrons stop flowing, there's no communications, which means there's no logistics, which means there's no emergency medical services and no law enforcement and no fire, that you can't go to the doctor. Hospitals shut down, and it's ICU only. Oh, they have backup generators. Yes, they do. I've been in a lot of disaster zones that had hospitals in them. They run maybe 10% staff. They admit no new patients. They're not doing surgeries, no elective operations, nothing. It's ICU and maybe NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. That's it. Water doesn't flow because there's no power to pump the water up into the water towers. Sewage plants don't work. So it's just a matter of about 3 days before you can't flush your toilet. And there's all these cascading effects if the grid goes away. And so, again, I would encourage people not to think about if the grid goes away, but think about when it goes away. And that's saying nothing of bad actors actively attacking the grid. Our large transformers are predominantly produced overseas. There's been effort to repatriate that here into the United States so that we're not at the whim of China for our large transformers. But having built a lot of wind power jobs, the main transformer on that job, my lead time for that transformer is 2 years. 2 years. And then when it gets here, it's either coming into a port in San Diego or a port in Houston where it has to be loaded on a special trailer and moved via permitted haul because it weighs 600 tons. There's only so many cranes on planet Earth that can pick and place that. There's only so many men and women on planet Earth that can actually splice that in and make it work. And then what everybody forgets is every one of those wind turbines, every one of those solar arrays, every one of those backup generators all require power coming into them, to their PLCs, programmable logic controllers, in order for them to operate. So doing a cold start of the grid where there is no power at all, not happening.
So when the grid goes down, it's going to be a while before it comes up.
Current DOE estimates are 2 to 7 years for restoration.
Whoa. That's a lot longer than I was assuming.
7 years is an interesting biblical number as well. If you've been reading the book of Genesis. Yeah.
So as our country's leaders brag about sometimes is putting another country, quote unquote, into the Stone Age. The same can be done with us very easily.
That fast.
Wow.
That fast. And I want to also encourage people, don't be afraid. Fear is a very good motivator, but it's been weaponized against us. We should never do anything out of fear. 2 of us will put 10,000 to flight. I serve him. What am I afraid of? Right? It's his will that's going to be done, not my will. But a prudent man foreseeth evil and hideth himself. So I can see that there's a problem over there. I should probably mitigate the risk of that potential problem now before I get over there, right? And so people shouldn't freak out. The grid's going to go away. Yeah, it's entirely possible that one solar flare, the Carrington event, one solar flare to the right area of the United States of America, we're done, man. Okay, cool. What can I do to mitigate that risk? And I think, especially with preparedness, the further down the path of preparedness you go, the more likely you are to end up in some type of rural living situation where you're on a homestead or something, where you can have, a handful of chickens and a goat and, more what we would call primitive technologies, which, by the way, I live that way. I choose to live that way now, and it's an absolute blessing. And then when you factor this in and you realize that the Father wrote us a love letter to a group of agricultural people, and you've got a field full of sheep, and all of Yeshua's parables start making sense now, oh, I get it. Sheep are idiots. I'm a sheep. Wait a minute, right? And so it's funny how all that interacts and how all that works. But we shouldn't freak out, right? Fear, while being a good motivator to get people to do things, is a negative motivator. We should be positively motivated to mitigate risk for the people that we love, because my working definition of preparedness is to perpetuate normalcy for the people that I love. That's all I'm trying to do. And so you get to decide what normal looks like, and you get to decide how much of normal you're capable of perpetuating. Cool. And then it's just risk mitigation. Long answer to your short question.
No, that's good.
The grid's very fragile, brother.
And we're going to get into more of this later about preparedness and this type of thing. But you said something very interesting to me when we were planning this, and that was that everybody thinks that, okay, self-defense and all that kind of thing, that's what I need. I need to have my sidearm, all that type of thing. But you said that that's not the most important thing to have on you. What is the most important thing?
Medical. You need medical capability on you, especially if you're into preparedness. Hopefully these things are starting to make sense. But the average civilian, the average citizen, is way more likely to be involved in a car wreck than they are in use of a weapon in self-defense. Way more likely. And I'm all for the Second Amendment. I've got 87 rounds of hollow points on me right now as we're sitting here. All for it. But I've also got a blowout kit and a tourniquet in my back pocket. Because statistically, the most dangerous thing we do as Americans is drive, right? #1 preventable cause of death in the United States of America. It's not diabetes, it's not heart failure, it's uncontrolled bleeding. Preventable cause of death, uncontrolled bleeding. And should I have a tourniquet? Yes. Should I know where to grab and apply direct pressure so I can force a clot to form? Absolutely. And so it's applicable not just to soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, or law enforcement, EMS, and fire, but to everybody. The basic physiology of humans is the same regardless of what you do for a job. The air has to go in and out, and the blood has to go round and round. If either one of those two things stop, you die.
All right.
So I should probably have some tools in my toolkit to make sure I can perpetuate that. And the #1 toolkit you have is this. because with my brain, understanding that physiology, I might not have a committee on TCCC recommended windlass tourniquet in my pocket, but I know where the pressure point is to stop that arterial bleeding.
Well, I'm glad you teach that stuff on your channels too. We're going to get
Yep.
more into that. So
Yep.
now we've kind of briefed folks as to where we're heading here and what you're all about.
I told you I could talk all day, brother. I
It's
apologize.
great. That's why you're here. I'm sure people are glued to this right now. And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how you got here. So
Tenfold.
thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. Your donations helped bring Bear here, or TJ, or however you want to term him. Anyway, so we'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Thank you again for making this show happen, and your support is how we perpetuate this into the future so other people can see this, because it's just as important for them as it is for you now. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay.